You know who number one is. Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to be a Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom Grossi, and today we will be breaking down the NFC North and ranking them. Now, I know I don't do this one every single week because I feel like this one you don't have to do every single week. But considering that we're getting into week 8, you know, we're coming up to almost the halfway point of the season already, which is depressing as hell considering football is not going to be in my life in just a few months. And it's just going to be a dark hole of terribleness. It's not comforting, but I can tell you what is comforting: the current rankings of the NFC North. Now, before we get to that, we gotta do some Patreon shout-outs. The first shout-out goes to Mitchell Kiernan, up in his subscription from $4 to $10. That's 4, that's 10. A big thank you to you, my good sir. And then for the $15 Beer Master tier, he will be supplying us the beer and we'll be cheersing him on every stream. That is John Fanzelter. Yes, a big thank you to you, my good sir. Our number 3 guy is a John Dasumi, or Dasum, or I'm sorry if I just butchered your name, but the $8 donation, which is the I'm not a Packers fan, so I don't want to support the Packers tiers, so I'll pay a little extra money to just show my support. A thank you to you. And numero cuatro, number 4, we have the number 1 highest donator of all time coming in as a beer master at the $15 tier. It's Tie-Dye22. Thank you, and thank you to all the new, the old, the OGs, and everybody who has joined the Grossi Posse over at patreon.com/TomGrossiComedy. Now, let's jump on into it. Now, obviously, week 7 was difficult for half of the NFC North, and the other half was looking pretty good. And it seems like we're starting to finally get some separation, because the first 6 weeks, you know, things were knotted up. Things were pretty darn tight. This was a very, very competitive division, and I still think it's going to be a very competitive division up until the very end. But right now, it seems that teams are projecting downwards, and teams are still rising to be the cream of the crop. And let's jump into it, starting with our number 4 pick. Now, a lot of people are going to think this is a reactionary pick, and they think, oh man, just based off one game. But let me explain my rationale before you jump down my throat and hit the dislike button. At number 4, I have the Chicago Bears. Now, if you are not new to this channel, you know that I have defended Mitch Trubisky. I did a whole video on it. I have defended the Chicago Bears. I have said that their defense is obviously the best defense. That was shown in loads yesterday. Considering the Vikings got thrown all over. They're the best defense in the NFC North, potentially even all of the NFL. And the reason why I am putting them here, even though technically the Lions are ranking in the number 4 spot in standings, is because of what their offense is currently doing to that defense and the injuries on that defense. I don't know how you fix some of these problems. Now, this is not to say that the Bears are not going to rebound. I still think they are a very strong team. I think that they still have very big weapons. But right now, with the Bears sitting in 3-3, they've lost their last 2 games. Points scored is 112, which is the lowest in the division. Points allowed is 105, which is the lowest in the division. So again, their defense is still ranking number 1, but their offense is real down on the bottom. Now, the Saints yesterday, if you didn't watch that game and you just looked at the final score, you're like, oh, it was a pretty close game. It was a pretty closely contested matchup. It was not. It was a beating. And, you know, there was a point where I was sitting here at Week 7 predictions, and I was going to pick the Bears because it's in Soldier Field. The Saints are banged up. They didn't have Kamara. And I thought, you know what? It's going to be really tough for the Saints to win, to pull one off going into Chicago. And it was the complete and total opposite. Teddy Bridgewater and Latavius Murray just demolished that defense, and the offense just could not get a single thing going. So they didn't have Breeze or Kamara, and the offense was just absolutely horrendous. And a lot of people, of course, are pointing at Mitch Trubisky, and he absolutely needs and deserves some of this blame. But at the same time, you look at what you've done in the rushing game, just yesterday. The fact that you had 4 rushers at one point, and you had a total of 18 yards rushing for the entire game. That's it. It was 19, but I think Cordell Patterson, he ran for -1, besides obviously the big kickoff that he had. That is disgusting. Mitch Trubisky threw the ball 54 times. What are you doing, Matt Nagy? And Matt Nagy came out and said, well, you know, we tried to run the ball a bit and it just really wasn't working. And then they just went away from it completely. It was a joke. A complete and total joke. So yeah, Trubisky 34 for 54, 251 yards and 2 touchdowns. You look at those stat lines and you're like, oh, that's not too bad. No, it was bad, considering the majority of that came completely and totally in garbage time. Through 3 quarters on 10 drives, they totaled 85 yards, and that is it. They could not move the ball on this Saints team whatsoever. Trubisky overthrew everybody by a freaking frackin' mile. You would have thought it was Mile High Stadium. This made absolutely no sense. The game plan, the offensive line did struggle, but Trubisky held onto the ball a really long time, and even when he didn't, he overthrew his receivers. Now, Mitch Trubisky is obviously injured right now, but the reason why I'm ranking them at number 4, because of right now, if this continues, they're not making the playoffs, because the Bears' offense is starting to make the Bears' defense worse. And what I mean by that is because they're constantly going 3 and out or giving up the ball or what have you, what's going to happen is that defense is not going to be able to rest, and because of that, they're going to be on the field more, and they're going to be more and more tired. They're going to get wiped out, and there you go. Also, the fact that Akeem Hicks has been lost for the entire season is detrimental to this team. I was just talking about this on the podcast with Andy Herman yesterday, and I was saying that Akeem Hicks going down, right? Akeem Hicks is a phenomenal player. And Khalil Mack obviously is great. He had led the team in tackles yesterday. I believe he had 8. But Khalil Mack makes guys like Akeem Hicks more dangerous, because if they're doubling up on Khalil Mack, it allows Akeem Hicks to get to the quarterback, the running back, etc. And so changes need to happen. They're playing the Chargers next week, who, good God, who knows what they're going to get. Maybe Melvin Gordon won't fumble it on the 1. Who the hell knows at this point? It's the Chargers. I'm done trying to predict who they're going to be. But the Bears need to rebound quickly. They're basically in the same exact spot where it's the same narrative that's coming out when they beat the Vikings a few weeks ago and everyone was crapping all over Kirk Cousins. So I do think that they can rebound. But the reason why they're number 4 beneath the Lions is because the Lions, I think, would put up a better fight against the Saints. And that, yeah, their defense is not good right now at all. But their offense, you know, they're putting up some numbers. And so I think at least would it be more competitive, considering the majority of these points and yards and stats were completely scored in garbage time. So right this second, at the end of Week 7, I have the Bears last in the division right now. Then moving on to what we just talked about, number 3, the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions have dropped 3 straight, 3 very, very winnable games, obviously against Kansas City, in which they fought incredibly hard and could have won that game. Then, of course, to the Packers, which was just marred by controversy. But, you know, at the same time, not making excuses. I did a whole video about how the refs screwed them over. But again, like, they weren't able to convert on the 3 turnovers that they caused for the Packers. But you had that defense who was getting torn up by the Vikings yesterday. You know, Slay is obviously, you know, is really, his absence is hurting that secondary. And looking at their stats, they're 2-3-1. Points scored is 149. That's 3rd in the division, and points allowed is 160, which is 4th in the division. So they're struggling on defense and offense at this point. But again, they're at least a somewhat balanced team. You know, Matthew Stafford and Marvin Jones just lit that Vikings secondary up, and it was definitely impressive. So I think what the Lions is that they could be undefeated right now. All these games that they have lost have been very, very winnable, going back to week 1 when talking about the tie with the Arizona Cardinals. So I think that their team is showing that they can get better. They, again, are in within a very competitive division, but sitting at the bottom of the division right now in the standings, it's going to be very difficult to claw their way out of. But who knows? They have the Giants next week. They'll be able to potentially rebound. Then over at number 2, we have the Minnesota Vikings. Oh, look at that. A few weeks ago, you were at the bottom. Now you're here. Yep. At 5-2, they've won 3 straight. Yeah, so you stop pouting, everybody, and everyone who was running Kirk Cousins out of town, and I said you were stuck with him, but at the end of that video, I said you're probably going to have a really good October, and everyone's going to forget about it, but then you're going to start playing good teams again, and it's all going to fall apart. But right now, they have scored the most in the division with 192 points. Point allowed, they are second within the division with 123. Kirk Cousins has been playing really good in the last 3 games. He has 300 passing yards, and then also 4 touchdowns in back-to-back games. Now, they have played a terrible Giants secondary, a terrible Eagles secondary, which we lost to, and a Lions secondary, which is super-duper suspect, allowing their offense to do very, very well. But Stephon Diggs ain't complaining anymore. Adam Thielen, who obviously got hurt this past Sunday, he ain't complaining, because he's getting a lot of targets as well. Now, their defense is not as good as we thought it was, considering that it got beat up yesterday. Obviously, it's a divisional game, but there was definitely points scored on them. And next week, they have the Redskins, who they'll be able to kind of just dominate again, and they're probably going to go 4 straight. And so the month of October is going to be pretty good for the Minnesota Vikings, and who knows, it might come down to that Week 16 game against the Green Bay Packers, and that's just going to be spicy. But for right now in Minnesota, things are good. Things are good. And finally, we have number 1, the Green Bay Packers, you son of a gun. That's right, the Green Bay Packers not only sitting on top of the NFC North in the standings, but also in my heart and soul. Sitting at 6-1, they've won the last 3 straight. Points scored is 184, that's second in the division. Points allowed is 139, that is third. Their offensive attack was on full display yesterday with Aaron Rodgers throwing for 5 touchdowns, rushing for 1, throwing over for 400 yards, never really even needing anybody else, distributing the ball all over the place, touchdowns to both backs of Jones and Williams, touchdowns to MVS, touchdowns to Kumaro. It was just all over the place, touchdowns to Jimmy Graham. And the offensive attack, it was just so incredible and so well balanced. And what I have seen from this team is just they find different ways to beat you every single week, right? So, for example, Cowboys, right? They used Aaron Jones, 4 touchdowns. They used the ground game, right? The pass was yesterday. The defense was against the Bears game. The refs were against the Lions game. Every single part of this team is like finding ways to win differently week to week to week. And I think that's showing a well-balanced team. And so when you look at the fact that Davante Adams is injured, I think this might wind up being one of the best possible scenarios for the Packers because it's forcing these receivers to step up. And we saw for the first 2 games, it was really relying on the ground game, and there was a little bit of a balance. They relied on the receivers a little bit more against the Lions, and it was sloppy. This week, clean, crisp football on the offensive side. The secondary obviously is missing Darnell Savage a whole lot, but they were getting to that bend, don't break. The Raiders had long sustained drives, but they didn't come away with a whole lot of points. But so before garbage time, it was only 17 points. And so when they get Savage back, and just think when they get Davante Adams back, this team hasn't even reached their full potential yet, and that is freaking scary to every single team in the NFC and the NFL. So with that, the Green Bay Packers are definitely heading on up, and I can't wait to see what happens next. But let me know your rankings down below. Do you think the Bears, after losing 2 straight, it's a little bit too harsh? You think the Lions should be on the bottom? Let me know what you think. Are the Vikings for real? Let me know. You can always find me at TomGrossiComedy.com or at TomGrossiComedy, all social media, see down below. Check out Packcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and of course on the YouTube. And a big shout and thank you to all the Patreon members over at patreon.com/TomGrossiComedy. But thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack, go.